Hi, I'm Yehuda Ben Khalifa, and this is a virtual tour of David Geffen Hall as a midterm presentation for my Cultures of Modern Architecture class taught by Professor Paul Glassman in Yeshiva University. In the background, you will be able to hear Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, played by the New York Philharmonic. It will soon become apparent why that is apropos. So we are going to primarily be focused on two buildings, one more than the other. David Geffen Hall is going to be the primary focus of this presentation, but the Bauhaus, which I believe to be its clear architecturally stylistic antecedent, is going to be compared and contrasted to the David Geffen Hall throughout to give you an idea of the source of the design. Walter Gropius founded the Bauhaus School, which had 3 locations within Germany. One of its locations, the Bauhaus School in Dessau, was built in 1925. It finished its construction in 1926. Unfortunately, it shut down in 1933 because of the World Wars. It was restored for the first time in 1972. After extensive renovation, it was awarded UNESCO World Heritage status in 2006, and it is an illustrious and persevering research facility that has strong heritage in Bauhaus. The architect, again, Walter Gropius, one of the pioneers of the modernist style in terms of architecture. Clearly, you can see this is a primary example of the modernist style, a very early example, well, at least for the 20th century. On the bottom right picture, you can see the David Geffen Hall located in Lincoln Center, which is Midtown Manhattan. The architect Max Abramowitz designed this building to be one of 3 buildings of the Lincoln Center. He did not design all 3, he only designed this one, but you can see its clear modernist styles. This building was built to functionally to house the New York Philharmonic and seat 2,738 people in its auditorium when it opened in 1962. It actually finished first. The construction finished first out of the 2 other Lincoln Center buildings. It was originally named Philharmonic Hall, and then later renamed in 1973 Avery Fisher Hall after he donated $10.5 million, which is the equivalent to around $60 million today. He donated this money because intense renovations were needed, specifically acoustically, but we will get to that later. Lincoln Center officials announced Fisher's name would be removed from the hall so that naming rights could be sold to the highest bidder as part of a $500 million fundraising campaign to refurbish the hall. In 2015, the hall was renamed David Geffen Hall after Geffen donated $100 million to the Lincoln Center. They never did reach the $500 million mark, though. Bauhaus Dessau, again, designed by Walter Gropius, and David Geffen Hall, designed by Max Abramowitz. Though they were 20 years apart, there were significant stylistic differences. Again, they were not the same person, so that's very fair. On the bottom left, you see the floor plan for the Bauhaus in Dessau. It has a different, more spread out feel than the almost warehouse-like structure of the David Geffen Hall. But this is natural as its functions were different. The function of the Bauhaus was to be a school, so you see many small rooms, some larger than others, I'm sure meant to house different quantities of student in each room, while the David Geffen Hall clearly has one large room and everything is orbiting around that, so to speak, in terms of importance. Clearly these had different functions, though the outside is shockingly similar, in my opinion. First, let's get a little bit into the backstory of Walter Gropius. He was born in 1883, and he passed away in 1969. He was a German architect, and he founded like I said earlier, the Bauhaus School, and he is widely regarded as one of the pioneering masters of the modernist architectural style. He had a brief lull in his career as he joined the army during the wars, but his career advanced tremendously during the post-war period. He didn't even go easy. He was known as a tough man after he had an inflammation in a certain part of his body. I can't remember which. They say it took him a week to die. He did not go easy. Again, one of his buildings, the Bauhaus, the one we are primarily focusing on, has a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It also has a center in Tel Aviv, Israel, which has its own World Heritage site, which is, I think, very impressive. Anyway, you can see here he had other examples of his modernist style in some of his other buildings. The Faugus factory, which we discussed in class, the Workbund exhibition, also discussed in class. The primary style or theme that you can see within these is this facade or curtain of windows, specifically or more primarily in the MetLife building because it's taller. The entire expanse of the building is just one facade of windows. And although there's a ribbon of visible pillars, so you can almost see the skeleton and the structure of the building, you can see the strength of the building, you can still see the excuse me, you can still see the ribbons of windows and almost look like cells, in my opinion, but they wrap around the building. You can see more clearly in the Fugis and the Workbund exhibition the way that the windows, he likes to bring them around the corners. He doesn't want you to see the load-bearing parts of the corners. He wants you to just see the curtain of glass. So yes, this is clearly, I think, these are all very good examples of his modernist style. A quote I liked of his was, "Architecture begins where the engineering ends." It's kind of like a chair. A chair is not that complicated to build, but it's to make a chair beautiful takes beyond the engineering, and just like a building, to make a building beautiful, you need more than just the math. You need the art. He brings the art into architecture, even though it's not really there. Well, at least like the way it's spelled. Max Abramowitz. Here are some examples of his buildings. He had much less uniform buildings, in my opinion, but within all of them, the glass, concrete, and steel were utilized and highlighted. And I think one of the things he loved to do, and you can really see it the most in the David Geffen Hall, is that he uses glass to light up the building. He makes it come alive, in my opinion. It really brings out the warmth. In the daytime, you see the reflection in the National City Tower, and he really uses glass to give life to buildings, in my opinion. And he really appreciated what he did. He's a quote of his is, "Buildings become a business. It should be one of the visual joys of society. The man in the street should get a kick out of it." And well, I get a kick out of his buildings, and I think the David Geffen Hall is a perfect example of how he enjoyed his work. So some of the construction details of these buildings. Both of these buildings were primarily made with glass, reinforced concrete, steel, and the Bauhaus had brick on the inside as a load-bearing parts. The purpose of both buildings, again, was to accommodate different people, but they had different functions. One was for classes, one was an auditorium. So yes, they look quite different. Here are some... on the bottom are just the building's mid-construction, so you get to see the skeleton of the building, see the bones of the building. On the top, you see two different sections of the building. While the David Geffen Hall, that is strictly a section of the auditorium itself, the inside, and the way the seats are layered, it shows you, it hints to what I'm going to explain later as an acoustic feel to it, so as many people as possible can see the stage, which is really what an auditorium is for. Well, the Bauhaus in Dessau has very uniform, while the building's very spread out and not stacked on top of each other so much, what is stacked on top of each other is very uniform because it's a classroom and the function of each floor is pretty similar. Here are two examples. You could see the 2,000 plus seating availability of the David Geffen Hall on the right is clearly much more conducive to an orchestra than the small classroom lecture room in the Bauhaus in Dessau. Built to house the New York Philharmonic, the David Geffen Hall actually went through a lot of issues acoustically. The state-of-the-art concert hall featured retractable acoustic clouds, specified by Leo L. Baranek, the hall's acoustician. Unfortunately, the new hall's acoustics were immediately panned by audience and critics, with musicians complaining they couldn't hear themselves on stage. They tried several attempts to redo this and remodel it and revamp it, but to this day, there are still critics of the acoustics of the David Geffen Hall. Here's a little bit about the science of the acoustics. The most important thing is acoustic is you want it to refract as much as possible so that it reaches, the sound waves reach as many people as clearly as possible. You can see Symphony Hall in Birmingham is very similar in its structure to the David Geffen Hall. Style details. Walter actually intended for you to not be able to see the entire building, or at least this particular building, the Bauhaus in Dessau. He didn't want you to see the entire structure at once. So you'll know, this is a very good view to realize that if you stand on any one point of any one side of the building, you will not see, or at least even have a good idea of the entire side. He wanted you to have to walk around to get a good view of it. Yes, so he wanted you to get a good view of the building, specifically with the entrance. The entrance there's a very clear difference in the entrances. The David Geffen Hall has a grand entrance. It's noticeable. But you also can't see where the entrance is. You just know that happens to be the north side. We're looking at the north side of the building. That's the entrance, but you don't really know where the entrance is. It's all one entrance. As it's a giant auditorium, it's meant to house a lot of people. It's meant to be open to a lot of people. So there's no clear entrance, as it's all an entrance, and I think that's very grand. That is also why he has those large pillars, so that you don't have. So unfortunately, the facade of windows behind it is obscured, as it's not so unobscured in the Bauhaus. For example, right above in the top left picture, you can see windows and lines, and the steel is all very clear. The entrance to the Bauhaus, however, was meant to be a school. So that not a giant, but the large entrance, obviously much smaller than David Geffen Hall, was painted bright red. But the focus of the building was not its entrance. The focus was its design, while the focus of the David Geffen Hall was its entrance, because there's a very one way in, one way out type of feel to the David Geffen Hall. You walk in to see the symphony, and then you walk out, and after having enjoyed it. So different functions, different forms, as the saying goes. Form must ever follow function. Back to the lines. You can see that if you look through the almost wall of pillars at the north side of the David Geffen Hall, again the entrance side, you can see a little unclearly, but definitely there. Through the facade of windows are slabs, the floor slabs, indicating each floor. This is also visible within the Bauhaus. It's clear in this picture over here. You can see where each floor begins and ends through the curtain of glass. Unfortunately, and I really do think it's unfortunate that you can't see it as well in the David Geffen Hall, because it really, I think, is magnificent. At night, it lights up, and I really think that is the primary intention of Max Bromwitz. Both of these buildings very similar in feel, if not identical. Again, they're not identical, but they have very similar feels to them. One is meant, however, to entertain, and the other to teach. The building itself is not so much the entertainment when it comes to David Geffen Hall as what's inside, while the Bauhaus is the entertainment because of what's inside. I think it's a very, very almost poetic difference. Again, you can really, just to finish up, you can really see, I think from this, just from the inside, the top two pictures, you almost wouldn't know which building you're standing in if you're looking at those pictures because of how identical they are. And I think this picture, more than any other picture I've found, really shows you the similarities. The top right picture is actually the atrium to the Symphony Hall of the New York Philharmonic, or, as is known today, the David Geffen Hall. Here are my resources. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have the opportunity to see, at the very least, this building, because it is not far by.